I am all that stands between you and lunch. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's new in Solaris and Karma for this release for Houdini 22, and hopefully avoid too much feedback from the microphones. How many people were at the event last night? A good half, I would say. All right. This is kind of going to be the slower paced version. Last night was like the double espresso, 8 minutes, no Q&A version of what's new. This is more the 40-ish minutes, take it slow, decaf coffee version with lots of Q&A at the end. That said, if you figure you already saw it, you don't really care, that's fine. Go for lunch early, do catch up on email on your laptop. I'm not bothered. I'm not going to be offended. Don't let me waste your time. I'm also going to complement some stuff that's already been talked about in earlier presentations. So let's start by talking again about us bringing this USD component building into SOPs. It's an environment that people are familiar with. And as much as we would love for people to eat, sleep, breathe Solaris, LOPs, USD, we appreciate that's not going to happen today. So USD component building, something we've had in LOPs for a while, it's now there in SOPs. You can create your scene structure in the same environment that you are creating your models, importing your models from other sources. You don't have to kind of go back and forth and back and forth. So we've got this USD create component node here, which lets you set up your proxies automatically. So you can have convex hulls, you can have bounding boxes. It's got a second input, so if you want to create your proxy from another source, you can do that as well. We give you this create proxy node as well. Just kind of a nice, easy way to begin to create your assets, the components or the subcomponents. Now, once you've got a number of some components, we're going to build up a little section of that desert scene you saw previously. You can now start to define a bit of the hierarchy, the structure. How do you want your scene to actually be organized? And then once you've kind of got that in mind, how do you want the things to be placed spatially? Where should things be relative to each other, relative to the world? So in this case, we've got kind of our 4 assets that have already been set up. And we're going to start to merge them together and put them into their world space location. And I want to cast an eye back and forth, both between the viewport, this kind of familiar environment you have for moving things around, but also the top right, where you can start to see the scene hierarchy coming together. You'll start to see some parenting coming into place. You'll see new components slotting in. And all of this is being done within this one familiar environment. So you don't have to really learn much new terminology or workflows here. You can kind of, again, just stay in SOPs, stay where you're happy, stay where you're comfortable. If you aren't ready to make that jump to Solaris, because we're not taking anything away from LOPs, of course, but we want you to be able to use this power in this environment that you're familiar with. Now, this particular sign here, we're going to be instancing it. We're going to want one for the front and the back, and hopefully you caught it as it went by. You can also set up your instancing directly inside of SOPs. So while we've got 2 nodes for the 2 different signs, one is actually just a direct instance of the other, and you'll get that benefit when you move over to the rendering of that render time instancing. One more we're going to bring in here, and this is to highlight in particular pivots. So if you've ever used Solaris before for layout, pivots have been unpleasant. I'll leave it at that. We've tried to make that a lot better here. So again, in SOPs, pivots were pretty good. You could move things around. You could use it for particularly kind of grounding the rotation around things. And with those SOP tools in mind, you can now set up your pivots really nicely. Again, here in SOPs with the component building, all of this stuff carries over to USD, carries over to Solaris. So when you move back to the Solaris world, that pivot is going to be where you put it. You want to put some more animation on things. Maybe that sign is meant to tilt a little bit more. Pivot will be there waiting for you, ready to pick up. Let's talk a little bit about the Solaris specific tools. We're going to move out of SOPs now into LOPs. Sorry, we are in LOP space now. We are in USD space now, but hopefully in environments that are pleasant for you as artists to work in. We're going to stay fairly non-technical for most of this. So we've had some tools in the past for painting instances. I think we called it the layout LOP before, and it's been rebranded in Houdini 22 as the paint instances LOP. And we've improved the robustness. We fixed a whole pile of bugs and added some new functionality in here as well. So this is a tool that we've got for populating your scene with, I'm going to say small-ish, maybe medium-ish numbers of instances. So you can grab a paintbrush and just start scattering stuff all over your geometry. Put brushstrokes where you do want things to be, switch to the eraser to take things away from where you don't want them to be. We allow you to create these shapes that are then going to get projected onto your geometry and basically just fill at that point. So take a circle, draw it on the screen, boom, lots of stuff inside the circle. Draw a rectangle on your screen, boom, lots of stuff inside the rectangle. We'll switch back to the brush mode to do a little bit more cleanup, remove some things from the arch. And then finally, we're going to switch to the place tool to kind of put some very specific assets in some very specific places. So you can just kind of click, I want it right there, click, I want it right there, or click, hold. I'm going to actually change the scale, the rotation, because I want it to be just so. So these are the tools that are available now inside of the Paint Instances LOP. Now, when you want to move from having kind of a small to medium number of things where you've got really good control to, I just want lots of stuff in my scene, we've introduced a new scattering procedural. So this is the Scatter Instances LOP that Fiona talked about earlier. And it is really designed to populate your scene with lots and lots and lots of things. You don't really care where any one specific thing is, but you do still want some amount of control. And we try to offer that to you. This is not just I click a button and stuff appears and I have no more control over it. There are lots of controls on the Scatter Instances LOP, and I'm going to let this play. You can kind of watch as some of it goes by. I'll talk about the masking more specifically in a little bit, but I want to just talk briefly about the underlying technology here. So this is implemented as a Hydra procedural. It runs in the Hydra rendering pipeline. This means it just shows up in the viewport, it shows up in Husk. The execution will be identical. Fiona mentioned this is not something that shows up by default in the Houdini viewport, like the Vulkan viewport. You can turn it on if you want, but typically when you're working in Vulkan or GL, you want things to kind of be light and responsive. So we have it off by default, but it's there. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. Similarly, if you have Karma in your viewport, it's not forced to be there. You can turn it off again. It's just kind of on demand. We just have flipped defaults, off by default in Vulkan, on by default in Karma. So, okay, fine. Let's carry on and talk about some of these masking controls that we've got. So the first one I want to talk about is just this up-axis direction. So certain things that you might instance should always be facing upwards in your scene. Trees tend to point upwards. Even if they're growing on slanty ground, they kind of bend and point upwards towards the sky. Otherwise, they fall off the cliff. But other things will cling on to the sides of objects or the tops of objects and kind of like point in that direction. Mosses, for example, will grow more along the normal direction. So next we've got ambient occlusion. Certain things will prefer to grow in crevices or kind of shadowed areas. Other things will prefer direct sunshine. They will really avoid those crevices or those shadowed areas. So these are some of the controls that we expose for you here. And you can see that there are invert toggles on everything in terms of like, do I like this? Do I not like this? Should I be included or excluded in this particular zone? Moving on to camera-based kind of culling or inclusion. You can specify any camera in your scene. Typically, you would use the render camera for kind of like frustum-based optimization. You don't want to spend your RAM budget on instances that are way over here when you're just rendering stuff over here. In this particular case, I chose an external camera just to really highlight the impact of this. You can see that there is a very clearly defined region, the region that is visible through that particular camera, where objects either will or won't be. And then I want to talk a little bit about control we have for using external geometry to influence the scene. You can kind of get a bit of a hierarchical scattering through point instancers. So these signposts here were actually created upstream using the vanilla point instancer tools that we had previously. And you can bring them in and use them to influence the presence or absence of geometry. And then lastly, we can bring in hero meshes as well. So we'll bring in this kind of cube, which we're going to use to kind of move around the scene for very fine control over where instances should or shouldn't be placed. So again, this procedural doesn't let you kind of click on any one instance and say like, hey, change this sphere to a box or just remove this one thing. But we do still offer a lot of that artistic control because we appreciate that something that's just completely black box and one click, it's not going to be useful for anybody. So again, talking about kind of clicking on like one box and, oh yeah, so let's talk about the transforms as well. Before I get into kind of the clicking on one box changing to a sphere, we want to be able to also control at a more artistic, fine-grained level the orientation of these instances. And a lot of this is about introducing some variety. If every tree is exactly the same size, facing exactly the same way, you're going to call it out pretty quick. This is cheap CG. It looks bad. I was told not to swear, so I'll try not to swear. So we offer that kind of randomization across the orientation, rotation. We can add some spin in here. We can either make things just very subtly offset, maybe introduce like some manufacturing defects that these pylons weren't exactly manufactured at the same scale, or we can make it more dramatic. In the case of vegetation, you would absolutely want your trees to be spun around 360 degrees. We don't have a budget to build 10,000 unique trees, so you build 10. You spin them around and it looks like 10,000. And it's the same thing with kind of position, that we can kind of subtly off things up and down. If you're scattering rocks on the terrain, having something that sits just slightly lower, slightly higher than the other, really does give kind of a compelling illusion that these are actually different assets, when in reality, they aren't. They're the exact same rock. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the population, about how you go about scattering stuff. Like, how do you specify these things? Well, you can put in a number of prototypes. So in this case, initially we were scattering a cluster of cones. Now we're going to scatter one cone. And we're going to create a different group. And we're going to put something else in that group. And then something else in another group. So now we're scattering kind of different things. So we're going to scatter kind of cone A, B, and C. And we can play with the individual weights. That maybe we want more of this cone, less of that cone. And maybe we want that not to be driven by just a general slider, but we want that to be kind of more of a localized effect. We can start to do this as well. We can start to add in primvar controls or kind of texture maps. There are different ways of driving this. Again, we want you to have some artistic ability to say, this is how I want this scattering to be guided. I accept that the rocks are going to appear roughly where the rocks are going to appear, and I'm not going to be able to pick on any one of them. But obviously, there are still zones where I want rocks. There are zones where I want trees. So you can specify multiple objects within a group. You can specify multiple groups. You can kind of change the weighting between them. We allow all these different axes for you to kind of go and explore the space. And we really do look forward to getting feedback from you guys. This is our first stab of doing this procedural scattering inside of Solaris. I have no doubt there are 1,000,001 things that we've missed. So give it a go and tell us about them. So that next release, there'll be less than 1,000,001 things that we missed. Let's go back to this desert scene again here. So I mentioned that the scattering is really for lots of objects. And up until now, we've been focusing on, I would say there are probably a few hundred, maybe 1,000 traffic cones. Here we've got about 500,000, changed between various cacti, kind of upright cacti, I don't know what they're called, barrel cacti, some tumbleweeds, some shrubs. And we're going to go and refine the scene a little bit. We're going to use some of those point and sensor masking tools I talked about before to make the ground around the boulders a bit more arid. We're going to bring in a road mesh. There it goes, pops into place. And we're going to avoid growing plants immediately either on the road or with a little bit of soft fall off kind of right at the edges of the road where maybe the cars would have been parking or kind of drunk drivers swearing off the road a little bit, hitting a cactus, knocking out of place. And we can just zoom in here to see that level of detail. Like these are actually fairly complicated plants, each one of these. And then we've got 500,000 of them scattered around our scene. And it all renders quite efficiently inside of Karma. And because this is a render time procedural, it means the USD scene itself is very lightweight. All we're storing is this kind of recipe for that description of what we are going to scatter, some rules about how and where we're going to scatter it. And then those 500,000 things just magically appear. I want to talk a little bit more, kind of carrying on this theme about deferred evaluation and bringing more and more performance to you as the artist working in Solaris. One of the constant bits of feedback we've gotten is that as scene complexity grows, Solaris gets slower and often in unanticipated ways. that you will set up your scene, whether it's super complicated or I would say this is kind of, well, as a production scene, this is quite lightweight complicated. For R&D, I would say it's medium complicated. But you've set this thing up, and then you kind of start going and noodling around with bits and pieces in your node graph. You're like, why does it take so long when I change the light color? All I'm doing is changing the color of the light. Why is this other thing recooking? And honestly, within Solaris, we don't have a lot of fine-grained dependency tracking. It really is the case that pretty much anything you do upstream is dirties the universe, and anything downstream can't pick and choose. It's like, something happened, universe is dirty, I have to recook. And we appreciate that that's a really frustrating experience as an artist. And so we've been trying to find ways to separate ourselves from that, allow you to kind of say, I'm going to work in this isolated space for a bit. I don't need the stuff downstream to cook right away. Let me noodle around. When I'm done, I'll tell you, and then you can carry on. So one of the examples of that is editing. So here we've got our scene, and I'm now in this edit state. And I'm going to start moving the rock around. And I don't need the scatter to immediately update. I want it to happen sort of on demand. Like, okay, now I want to see the impact of it. Okay, I'm going to go move some more rocks around. I don't need the scattering to respond every single mouse click because it takes a second or two for that scattering. And it's a really, really jarring experience as you're moving your mouse, wait a second, move your mouse, wait a second. I just want to move some things around, wait. Now please update for me. And I think this is going to be an absolute game changer for people doing that layout, that ability to kind of divorce your current action from that live cooking. You don't have to go and change to manual mode. It should just make things a lot easier. And just to really hammer that point down, if you look at the kind of performance monitor here, if you look at the cook count, I appreciate the text is kind of small. You can see that as we're moving the rocks around, it's not constantly recooking. You don't see that cook count going jump. It's only when we exit that edit state that you'll see it goes up from 2 to 3 to 4 or whatever it is. Another example is that we are doing more things in Hydra now. So we've got kind of the starting point of Apex inside of Hydra. We have an Apex Animate LOP, and this uses a Hydra Scene Index plugin. Nerd speak, you don't have to worry about it, for render time deformation of Apex characters. It's our first pass at this. There are definitely some things that are missing. We don't really have OpenCL support yet, so it's not as performant as it could be, or certainly will be in future releases. But we do have some speedy playback. I mean, this is 24 frames per second by deferring things to a later point in the rendering pipeline. And that's pretty awesome. Fur is another example of that. We have a new fur pipeline or hair pipeline which runs inside of Hydra. And it is, again, much more performant than the one that you would have had previously with the Husp procedurals. And there is a trade-off here. By moving things later into this pipeline and really focusing on performance, it is more black boxed than the previous approach. So the setup that we have for you is the setup that we have for you. If you want to come in and say like, yeah, can I add this custom deformer to this new work? No, the answer is no. Right now you can't. The Husp procedural still exists, and we're continuing to invest in them as well. Sorry, just one more thing about that hair procedural that runs inside of Hydra. It's also nicely couples with your scene. So if you have multiple time samples on your skin for deformation blur, we will pick that up and you will automatically get that on your hair as well. Something that people have been asking for. It's like, this velocity-based motion blur kind of sucks. Can we just have multi-segment motion blur? USD has this thing called time samples. Why can't we have our procedurals do time samples? And the Hydra for Hydra hair has that. Now, not to be left behind, the Husp procedurals also now have time sampled motion blur. So on the left is what is the best you could get out of Houdini 21, and on the right is what you can get out of Houdini 22 now. And yeah, I would say it is more than subtly different. Hopefully this will be very useful for you. And again, so these Husp procedurals, they're not going away anytime soon. And a big part of that is that customization opportunity that they give you. The Husp procedural framework, still not particularly documented as being extensible, but loads of studios have figured out how to put their own procedurals into place, how to either modify the hair procedural, put their own brand new hair procedural in, put something radically different in. We've made that framework fairly generic, quite intentionally, to allow people to explore that space. I should say that the subframe sample stuff here is not magically available only to hair. This is something that can be connected to custom procedurals as well. So if you are using the Husk procedural framework to do your own procedurals, please reach out, chat with us. We can help you understand how to make subframe motion blur work with that as well. But then on the flip side of it, the Hydra side, the Hydra one is going to be slightly faster, but it is going to be black boxed. And let me kind of reflect back onto scattering. The scattering also lives in that Hydra space right now. It is quite a black box. We do expose lots of controls on the Scatter Instances LOP, but that is more or less as far as you can take it right now. We do want to hear from you in terms of what you think is missing. We do want to hear compelling stories as to, oh yeah, but I really want my own scattering procedural. I really want my own scattering HDA to be plugged in. And then we can kind of explore what might be possible or how we make that work further in Houdini 23 and beyond. What we have underpinning all of it is arguably a semi-extensible, semi-generic way of bringing Houdini engine into Hydra. But whereas the Husk procedurals from day one really let you go and put your own Husk procedural graph in place, that is not really the case for the scattering procedural. It's not just like you can plug in any Houdini engine HDA and expect it to work on Hydra. It's not that extensible right now. Okay, but let's talk more about layout and some other cool stuff that you can do. We've been always improving our rigid body and kind of ragdoll tools. You've seen loads of awesome ragdoll stuff already today. We've been bringing more of that into Solaris, making our tools for physics-based layout better and better. So here's just kind of a fun example. I find this kind of stuff lots of fun and really cathartic, just grabbing big chunks of stuff and smush it against other chunks of stuff, kind of flattening out piles, building up piles, bringing everything together, iterating. And now we're going to switch a little bit to talk about some of the kind of the rendering advances. The first one is about mesh lights. We added mesh light support in Houdini 21, but one of the things that was missing from it was good support for instancing. And by instancing, I don't just mean making copies of the identical same bulb, because yeah, variety is the spice of life. You need things to look slightly different, but also having that per instance control. And in Houdini 22, we've got that. We've now got these instance mesh lights where each bulb has its own unique intensity, color, exposure, things like that. Another place where we've been really improving Karma is with volumetric lighting. So here's a simple scene where we've got 3 lights that are embedded inside of a volume. We've got that kind of rectangular green light there, a kind of tube light, the blue one, and then the red one is actually a point light. I know it looks like a sphere, but that's just our representation for a point light as well. So let's go and switch to a live rendering session and start rendering it. And we're just going to give it a few seconds and keep the resolution super low resolution so that you can see every single pixel in this image, because there are things that I really want to call out. So this is the render that you would get out of Houdini 21 after like 6-7 seconds for super low resolution. It's okay. I mean, I'm still blown away that you can do this in under 10 seconds. But it doesn't really capture what was in the scene. Like in particular, that was a point light. It was super, super bright. And what happened? Now it's just kind of this red blob. And it's kind of noisy. And yeah, fine, you can let it render for a minute, 5 minutes, an hour, and the noise will go away. But can we do better? So let's focus on that core issue first, that point light. So you can crank up the color limit, because that's ultimately where the issue is coming from. We're kind of reducing all of those bright highlights because we're worried that, oh, maybe they're fireflies. So you can manually turn that back up, and you can get that core shaped back again. Part of the trade-off is that the noise level has actually gone up slightly. So again, you can solve this by rendering more and more and more, but hey, who wants to do that? In Houdini 22, instead, we can reset our color limit and turn to a new control that we expose on the lights. And this is called something called equiangular multi-importance sampling. Did it. It's difficult. You got to practice one in front of the mirror. And when you do that, you get kind of both the shape of your lights back, but also the noise level drops drastically. So let's actually go and just prove that. Let's compare. So this is Houdini 21. This is what we get after cranking the color limit, and this is what we get in Houdini 22. And again, the render time across these is within a second of being the same. They're all like 7-8 seconds. So this is pretty awesome. If you're doing kind of lights inside of foggy environments, look for that equiangular multi-importance sampling toggle if you're using Karma, which of course everybody is. Everybody should be using Karma. It's amazing. Let's talk about more things about why Karma is amazing. We're going to talk about light blockers. So light blockers are very much like like those kind of 3D mesh controls I showed you for a scattering. You just want to put something in place and say like, my light should exist here, or my light should absolutely not exist here. This is stuff that I'd say particularly Pixar has been showing off for many years. They use this a lot in their animated films. And we've brought this control into Karma for your workflows as well. This is like this really, really art-directed control. You're just like, I'm just getting this light shining on this one object where I don't want, or not even just an object, but part of an object. So like light linking isn't going to be enough here. I need even further control. So we've got a variety of shapes. They each have fall-offs, things like that. It's just implemented as another light filter for you to play with. Okay, from lighting to texturing, let's talk about the texture material LOP that we've introduced. You saw it earlier in one of the previous talks, but it is a way to kind of make a one-jump switch to COPs and allow you just to stay in COPs and build up your look development. So right now we're inside of Solaris. I'm going to say, hey, I need to work on the material for this canary. I'm going to put down this LOP. I'm going to say that, yep, it's going to be assigned to the canary. And now I'm going to dive inside of COPs and do all my work. And I'm just going to stay here. I'm just going to stay in this environment. I'm not going to go back to Solaris. I'm just going to build up my material network. And I'm going to see the result live as I do it. And so we can do some exploration of colors, all of the various COP nodes, all the various pattern generations. Amazing things. You've seen how amazing COPs is. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a COPs artist, but some things here. Now, eventually we're going to run into a bit of a limit because they're like, hey, we've painted some little, I don't know, what do you want to call those, kind of flaky shapes on the back of the canary. We want to paint some more. So I've paused on this little toggle that we've added to our UI now. And this lets you flip back and forth between your parent viewport if you want. So like this COP network is embedded inside of a LOP network. And right now we're following that parent context. We're seeing everything inside of LOPs. We're seeing everything rendered in beautiful Karma XPU detail. But maybe I actually want to see things inside of COPs because I want to use the brush tools. So I can just click that one little icon and bang. Now we're inside of COPs. I can go and start to do some more painting. I can paint all these extra little shapes here, all these little extra shells that I want to fill. Click it again, back inside of Solaris. And that's the only thing that's changing. Just the viewport is giving us a different view. We've still got our node network there in the bottom right. We still got all the parameters in the top right. We can just flick back and forth depending on what is the useful viewport for us at this second in time. Do I want to see the XPU result? Do I want to be painting on my mesh? And I think this is a really, really powerful workflow that we didn't have previously. So talking about new tools that we've got for look development, let's talk about the new Flake shader that we get from MaterialX. With every release of Solaris and Houdini in general, we always bump up to the latest USD. We're going to move to 2605 for this release, and MaterialX 1.37, I want to say, I'm not positive. And one of the great things that comes with it is this absolutely gorgeous MaterialX shader. And by absolutely gorgeous, this looks okay. This kind of shows the diagnostics of what you can do, the outputs you can get from it. This is what makes it absolutely gorgeous. You can use it for a variety of effects. You can have kind of glitter embedded inside of a surface. You can use it for surface deformation where you kind of got that bumpy kind of Christmas ornament surface. There's a whole variety of things that you can do with flakes and car paint. Just lots of fun stuff here. Now, one of the things that's also shown in this particular render, but probably in a pretty subtle way, is that we have both curvature and ambient occlusion now back inside of Karma. I think we had them in a previous release, and then they kind of got pulled as MaterialX dropped support for it, but we've brought them back as Karma-specific shaders. So in terms of the curvature, here's just kind of a quick workflow of playing around with some of the controls that you've got for that, playing with kind of concave, convex, some of the blending and biasing you can do between them. It's kind of a way to find crevices and kind of convex regions, things like that. And I also mentioned that you've got ambient occlusion. So again, just some playing around with a few of the parameters here, things that you would tend to expect. And both of these, both the curvature and the ambient occlusion, are being driven by ray tracing. So it's just kind of another fun little example of what you can do with ambient occlusion. I kind of already gave a bit of a teaser to it with the scattering procedural, but let's talk about it in the look dev context. So let's imagine that you've done two different passes for the ground. You've got Greg outside here. Let's say you've done a wet pass for the ground and you've done a dry pass for the ground. We can use ambient occlusion with kind of a more or less pointing straight up vector to blend between them. So we get this really nice rain shadowing effect. So where the ground was covered either by Craig's umbrella or some of those overhangs, we'll use the dry ground shader, and everywhere else we'll use the wet shader, and we get this nice blending in between. And we don't have to go and paint that mask. I mean, this is responding dynamically to the scene. So if the director comes in and says, like, actually, Craig needs to be a little bit further forwards, that's fine. You just change the layout, move Craig further forwards, and the ground is just going to react automatically. So that's pretty awesome. All right, so now you got a beautiful image, but you want to make it even more beautiful. We're going to apply some comp filtering to it. So we've already had slap comp in the viewport for at least one release now, but it was very much a viewport-driven technique. You click some buttons in the viewport, you'd set up some comp networks somewhere else in your scene where you'd probably lose track of them later on. And they were stuck in that scene. It wasn't portable. It wasn't something you could bring with you or pass off to another artist in an easy way. So now we've brought this more into USD as a first-class citizen, and we have an image filter LOP that allows you to build up these effect stacks. So we'll go and choose from the ones that we expose here. Don't have all of COPs available, but there's quite a lot of stuff between denoising and blurring and various glows and various color remapping. You can do things that are either quite subtle or things that are quite drastic. You'll have to put up with my horrible R&D attempt to make the image look noticeably different. Maybe in a compelling way, maybe in a horrible way. But there we go. I mean, it's a pretty big change from what the image looked like initially. And again, I really just want to call out the fact that this is now being authored as USD data. These filters don't just exist in some random COP network inside of your HIP file. They're now part of your USD scene. So you save that USD scene out to disk, you can pass that off to your buddy. You can render it on the farm via Husk. It lives as an entity there. Or you can expose it as maybe a studio-wide library. Maybe you want to build up a library for your entire lighting or compositing department to use. So you build up all these different effect stacks of image filters that they can then go and choose from. Now, I said that everybody should be using Karma, and you should because it's amazing. I appreciate not everybody is. So here's an example that shows that image filters aren't a Karma-specific thing. They will work on the viewport for most, if not all, renderers. So here we're using RenderMan, for example. And you can see it's a live effect as well. So as I start manipulating the scene, the image filters are being applied on every single iteration as that image is streamed to the viewport. So we can move this onion around a little bit. So let's stick with our onion and talk a little bit about rendering pipelines. So we had this nice Karma setup already for many, many releases. But now you'll notice there's an extra node. So we've got, in addition to the render settings and the render ROP, we now have a render pass that is dropped down automatically for you. And part of that is also that there's a new connection that's being placed here. So now the render pass, which we introduced in Houdini 21 to allow you to specify, like, hey, in this render pass, I want this object to be matte and this object to be visible to camera. We now have a connection between the render pass to the render settings. So I'm going to mention this now, and I'll mention it again later. The render ROP will specify the render pass will specify the render settings. We can see that here, that we now have this render source attribute, which points at our render settings. So we'll go and set this one up to target the onion. This is going to be our render pass that is onion specific. And we'll create another Karma setup beside this one. And for this one, we're going to target everything except for the onion. This will be our no onion pass. So we'll go and we'll add an exclusion. So again, we're going to render everything except for the onion case, except for the onion in this case. And you might say, like, oh, why do I have two settings? I kind of want to do the same thing. I want to have the same number of samples. I want the same camera. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But when you actually render this thing out to disk, you're probably going to want to render them to different EXR files. You're going to want one EXR file for your onion and a different EXR file for the chopping board. And the only way to do that is to have different render products, which are then encapsulated inside of different render settings. So again, we're going to have a render ROP, which is going to drive multiple render passes, each of which is going to have a render settings, each of which is going to have a render product. I apologize for getting into the deep nerdy USD speak here, but it is important to kind of understand this a little bit. Now, once we've got this all set up, we can go outside of our render ROP and we can actually specify patterns. So rather than just rendering a pass, we can render all the passes. And then when we fire off mplay, we're going to first render off our no onion pass. And then when that's done, it's just going to automatically carry on and render our onion pass. So again, here I'm just rendering to mplay, but you could do the same thing rendering to disk. You don't have to manually go and create render ROPs for every single pass. You can set up all your passes, all your settings, all your products, one ROP at the end, render everything, and you'll get it. So I hope that you're excited about all this stuff. We've done lots of improvements to layout, to look dev, to lighting, to texturing, bringing a lot of workflow enhancements, hopefully just making things better for you as an artist, making things easier across both Karma and Solaris. So thank you for your time, your attention. We've got lots of time for questions, or if you're getting super hungry, sneak out now. Quick hand up over there already. I don't know if somebody's running around with microphones, otherwise just shout. I'll hear you. You, talk. I don't know where the microphone is. Oh, there it is.
Thank you for the great talk. And just a super quick one about the Hydra. You said that you can't put into HDAs or anything like that, and it's not sort of fully complete. But I was just wondering, like with scattering, can you manipulate it with anything like COPs? Like, because I know in COPs you can create like whirly sort of like different sort of textures that can maybe drive other things. Can you maybe like do something with like vertex animation or anything like that? Possibly could you drive it like with this, or is it just purely scattering static assets?
So we've not tried to tackle the case of anything kind of time varying for now. So there is definitely a lot of compelling reasons that you would want to work with animated deforming surfaces, buildings fracturing, things like that. For this release, we are really focusing on more static set generation. Now, that is a half answer to half of your question, I would say. You started by talking about, can we use COPs and things like that? And I would say that, yeah, to a degree, yes. I honestly am not positive whether we can maintain a live connection to COPs or not, or whether you would have to bake things out. But absolutely, using COPs as part of that texturing workflow is, I think, quite a compelling, useful, and it definitely was used a lot in some of the demos here, where texture maps were created inside of COPs, probably based off of the geometry that we were going to be scattering on. Those texture maps were exported and then attached to the scatter instance procedural. So a number of the controls that we expose on the scatter instances LOP can be driven either by primvars on the geometry or texture maps, which are then obviously UV driven on the geometry. So you do have some of that available to you.
Hello. Is there any new node that can manage in a simpler way light path expression? Like, yeah.
No, I think light path expressions still remain a fairly technical, either you speak the magic language or you don't, technology. There's not really much we've done in that space.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned that when you're showcasing these scatter instances, when you're moving the rock, and then there's a deferred update for the instances. How is that triggered? Like,
so I don't think there's like a button that you can do to manually do it, but certainly anytime you leave the state. So basically, when you enter the edit state, it kind of decouples part of your stage from the main scene, lets you work on this as, again, we're getting to use the nerd speak here, but it's operating kind of like on an isolated USD layer. And then when you exit the state, it tries to figure out like, how do I reparent myself back to where I'm supposed to be? And then applies those edits properly into the LOP node. And then at that point, the LOP node says, I'm dirty, and then everything downstream automatically recooks. So it's triggered off of entering and exiting the state.
I see.
Does that
Thank you very
help
much.
at all? Yeah.
Hi there. Yeah, with the scattering, I was just wondering whether there was, or how it worked with shader variation. I saw the tab there, but I wasn't. I was waiting for it to kind of move on across. And how that works with renderers, other renderers, possibly like Redshift and instances, and sort of going down the line.
So ultimately, what is being authored from the scattering procedural is exactly the same as you could do with the, say, the point instance or LOP inside of Solaris. The magic here is that it is deferred to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit faster, and keep your scene lightweight. So any renderer that would already support instances should just support the scatter instance workflow. What is coming through Hydra should look absolutely identical to it. It will have no clue that this came from a Hydra procedural as opposed to a USD-based workflow. In terms of shader instances, so yes, that was something I failed to call out. One of the things that we expose is the ability to have certain attributes kind of passed through. And I'm trying to remember exactly how it works. I apologize, I didn't work on this particular feature set here. But I think it's something along the lines of it will sample an attribute on the mesh that's being scattered and attach that attribute, that sampled data, to the instance so that it can then be picked up by the shader. If the shader is looking for a primvar of a certain name, it will kind of indirectly sample the source mesh through the instance.
Okay, and could you have a variation run by rocks? So say the instances near rocks are a slightly different color.
I don't know what the easiest, so yes, you can do that. How you do that, I'm not sure what the easiest workflow for that would be. Again, you'd probably want to be doing it would probably want to be baked onto the source mesh in some way that you're then going and sampling it.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
Hi, for the image sampling or image filters, you said that they would be baked out to USD. Does that mean they can play with other render engines, or is that just Karma?
It is not specifically to Karma. So the only limitation that I'm aware of is that it needs, again, I apologize for all the technical nerd speak here. The renderer needs to be rendering to the raster product type. So most renderers will do that either by default or by choice. Some renderers prefer to go through their own display driver workflow, in which case we don't have an opportunity to capture that. So when you render, sorry, I am going to go into the nerdy details here. When you're rendering into Viewport, everything is passed to Houdini because we have to display it in the Viewport. So all the renderers should work in the Viewport. When you're rendering to Husk, through Husk to disk, again, the renders can be saved to disk either by Husk, in which case we can absolutely run our image filter workflow and it will be renderer agnostic. It'll work with Karma, RenderMan, Redshift, Arnold, just anything. Or the rendering engine can directly save it to disk itself. Maybe it wants to use a proprietary format, in which case we as Husk don't even see it. We don't see the image, and so we don't have an opportunity to modify it. So there is certainly the possibility and opportunity for all third-party renderers to go through the image filter workflow, but it does require that they kind of send the images to Husk, to the Viewport, where we can go and post-process them.
Okay. Does that also mean it would use a Houdini license?
The image filters shouldn't. I don't want to, I would need to triple check that, but it shouldn't.
Cool, thanks.
We're going to do a quick flippy giveaway. So this is a super easy one, so don't just scream it out, just put your hand up. What does USD stand for? I saw this one first.
Universal Scene Description.
Excellent.
Winner.
Go see Paula or Charlotte.
You're on.
And luckily you had
I had a question as well. This is about stability just between 21 and 22, but is there a kind of improvement to maybe COP stability and also maybe the viewport in LOPs at all? Or that you've seen or no?
I would have to admit that I have not spent a lot of time in the COP space, so I can't comment on that. In terms of just general stability, yeah, we're constantly working on it. I can't give you a number and say it is X% better.
Yeah.
We rely on user feedback, so please try it. tell us where you find it to be unstable, and we will absolutely pour our heart and soul into making it better.
Yeah, no, I think with COPS, I was getting a lot of OpenCL crashes, and that might be the machines we're using. And then in the Viewport and LOPs, I'm using the labs refresh Viewport quite a bit in terms of it kind of freezing a little bit, going back and forth between contexts and stuff like that. So
yeah, so for what it's worth, we have an internal kind of semi-ban on using that labs tool specifically to force us to try and improve things, because we do realize that yes, the Viewport does occasionally need a bit of a kick, and it is easy to become complacent to just like, oh, I'll just click the reset button and ignore it. So we make sure that that button is not allowed for developers, so that when they run into it, they have to go and fix it as those issues are discovered. In terms of the OpenCL thing, yeah, that's an unfortunate thing kind of across Houdini, that once that kind of gets triggered, you're kind of often stuck and like, I just have to shut down Houdini and restart it. It shows up in COPS because lots of people are using COPS right now. You can trigger that also in SOPs or DOPs sometimes. And hopefully some of the stuff that like Dimitri showed earlier with being able to kind of unload things from caches will help. These things are often kind of triggered by reaching some memory limit. So the more you can kind of keep your cache empty, hopefully the longer you live before that happens.
okay, thank you.
Hiya. With the Karma light blocker tool, I think it was Karma. Is that exclusive to Karma? Is it a black box node where you can't jump into it? And is there also functionality for custom shapes, even potentially using like a lasso tool in camera space in the viewport?
Yeah, so yes, as it currently stands, this is a Karma-specific tool limited to a handful of shapes, boxes, capsules, spheres, I forget what else, and then some kind of shaping controls for things like fall off. So there's nothing screen space based that you can do. I completely appreciate exactly why you would want to do that. That yes, you've rendered your image and you just want to paint out the light or paint in the light. This is not the tool for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Enjoy your lunch.
Once, going twice. Rob, great job. Thank you.